Well, good morning. How's everyone doing? Doing good today? Yay! I'm really glad to have all of you here. You guys look great. I'm glad. I know there's been like a plague going around. A lot of people have been sick, so I'm glad that you're all here and you're healthy. And so yeah, it's just great to see everyone. Before I launch into today's message, there's one thing that I do want to highlight for all of us. And some of you are familiar with it. Some of you have served at it before. It's been in a couple of the church news videos. But here in a couple of weeks, we have my absolute favorite event ever that we have ever done at Icon, but it's called Night to Shine. How many of you have served at Night to Shine before? Isn't it just the best? It's just the best. For those of you that don't know, Night to Shine, it's sponsored by the Tim Tebow Foundation, but it's basically a prom night for people with special needs. So we clear out the chairs, there's a dance floor, there's a DJ, there's activities, there's food, everyone gets all dressed up, and it's just totally a night to remember. Like if you have served at it before, you know that it's well worth your time. And we need you. We need more people to sign up to volunteer. Right now, from what I understand, we are at about a third of what we need as far as volunteers go to pull off this night and to make it just everything for our guests that are here. So if you are interested in serving at this and you have not yet signed up, you can either hop online, you can visit the table in the lobby. We would love to have you come and be a part of it. You will not regret it. And then also, maybe you would love to help, but you're not available the night of the event and you aren't able to actually physically be here. If you go online to our giving page, there's actually an Amazon wish list that the Night to Shine team has put together for items that are still needed for the event. So that's another way that you can contribute. If you can't be here in person, then maybe you can order something off Amazon real quick and have that delivered here so that we can make sure we have everything we need for this awesome event. So now I'm going to go ahead and launch into today. We are in our second week of our series, The Beginner's Guide to Predicting Your Future. It's the new year, and so everyone kind of has goals on the brain, and we're all thinking about the kind of life that we want to create for ourselves in 2020. And so we thought this is a really great time to talk about this. And we actually got the idea for this series from a book and a series that a pastor by the name of Andy Stanley has done. And this book is called The Principle of the Path. And last week, Dan kicked us off, and he talked about this, and he shared with us that basically the principle of the path is this. It's that direction determines destination. Direction determines destination. In order for us to arrive at our desired destination, we have to make sure that we're going in the right direction in the first place. See, we all choose what path that we're going to be on, and we have to make sure that that path is headed in the direction of where we want to go. Otherwise, we will not end up there. And this is something that I actually personally know a lot about. And if you know me at all in the room today, you know that I am absolutely terrible with directions. I have been lost while driving more times than I can count. And it's a little bit embarrassing. There's been lots of times where I've called Dan and been like, I don't know where I am, and I need you to help me. So I am absolutely terrible with directions. And especially, so back in the days, before like smartphones and GPS devices, this was really bad. Do you guys remember MapQuest? Did you ever pull up MapQuest and print out your directions? Even with that, it was a toss-up if I was going to make it to where I was trying to get to go. Even now with smartphones and GPS devices, there are still times where I end up lost because maybe Siri's lagging, and I'm like, the turn's coming up, and I don't know if I go straight or turn, and she's rerouting, and I'm like, I don't know where to go. So I get lost a lot of times. And people will say, we'll just read a map, and I'm like, no, I think people that can read maps have a superpower because I can't. I look at it and I'm like, this is not helpful. This does absolutely nothing for me. Or, it's like, don't come at me with your north, south, east, and west business where it's like, just head north, just head south. I'm like, I need landmarks. This does not help me. There's this meme that I found that describes it perfectly. People giving directions like, then head south. Okay, Lewis and Clark, do I turn at Chick-fil-A or go toward the Sonic? Okay, that is exactly how I feel. It's like you need to tell me landmarks of where I need to turn, what to look for, and then my ability to get to a place has just increased greatly. So needless to say, I have been lost several times in my life, and one of the worst times that this happened to me was probably about 14, 15 years ago. Dan and I used to lead a program for post-high school students. It was like a Bible college of sorts type program, and we used to travel around the country and do ministry opportunities, and so we were actually all headed to LA to help with this youth conference that was going on out there. And at the time, the team was planning on road tripping it, so a 20-hour drive from Austin to LA. Well, I happened to be very pregnant with our first child. I was about 7 months pregnant. And so if you've ever been pregnant, you know that when you're 7 months pregnant, taking a 20-hour road trip voluntarily is not something you're going to do. So I decided I was going to fly and meet them out there. Well, we thought, okay, so I'll fly. They're driving. They're going to be at this place. I'll get to the airport. I'll just rent a car by myself and drive to meet up with them, right? Great idea for someone who is really terrible with directions. And this is also pre-smartphone days, okay? So all I had was my hot pink, Motorola Razr flip phone that could barely take a picture. So, there was no GPS, there was no iPhone. I got to LAX, okay, and I call Dan. He asks someone who was there with them. They were actually at this place called the LA Dream Center. This person gives Dan directions. Dan gives me the directions. So I rent the car, and off I go. Well, the problem was the person that gave Dan directions gave him the wrong directions. So I'm driving. Did I mention I'm in LA? Did I mention that? Okay, I'm in LA driving by myself, great with child, okay? And this drive was supposed to take about 40 minutes, and about 45 minutes in, I realized, I'm not going the right way. And I'm seeing places, exits I'm supposed to take, and I'm I'm not seeing this. The green signs on the side of the road are not telling me that this is the exit that I need to take. And so I'm starting to get a little nervous. And so what I do, I decide I'm going to go ahead and exit and try to turn around, that maybe I missed something. Well, in the process of exiting, I end up on another highway because it's freaking LA, and there's 5 million highways, and they all kind of go all over each other. And I was so I realized at this point I'm really lost. I have no idea where I am. So I call Dan. I'm kind of freaking out. And he asked me a question. He's well, where are you? And I'm I don't know, Brenda. It's if I knew where I was, I would have no problem getting there, And he's well, are you headed north or south? And I'm did you see the meme? I don't know what direction I'm headed. I don't know where I am. And so I'm kind of freaking out, and I start naming off these different exits of the ones that I'm passing, and he's talking to someone who's from LA, and they're going, I don't know where she is. She's definitely not on where she's supposed to be going. And so I hang up the phone, and I have zero chill because I'm pregnant and I'm lost in LA and I don't know where I'm going. And so I do the only thing that any reasonable person would do, and I pull off at an In-N-Out Burger, and I get a cheeseburger and French fries, and I park in the parking lot because I was listen, if I'm going to be pregnant and lost, I don't need to be pregnant and lost and hungry. So I pull over, and I'm crying, and I'm eating my burger, and finally Dan calls me, and he's okay. He's tell me, figure out where you are a little bit. And so I'm I'm at this In-N-Out. And he's okay, I found someone that knows where you are, and here's the directions for how to get here. And so finally, hours later, I arrive at the Dream Center, and all is well, and I'm fed, and I'm happy, and I'm not lost anymore. So that was, quite the experience for me. And here's the thing. I really, really wanted to get to the LA Dream Center, okay? That was my intended destination, right? That's where I wanted to go. But the problem was, it didn't matter how bad I wanted to get there. It didn't matter how good my intentions were about getting there. I was never going to get there because I was going in the wrong direction. And I think that's so true for us, not just in times like this when we're actually physically lost in LA, but also times in our life where we can have all the good intentions in the world, but if we're not headed in the right direction, we are not going to get to our desired destination. Think about all the times in your own life when maybe this has happened for you, where there's been something that you have intended to do, something that you intended to happen or you really wanted to happen, but then when you look back on it for whatever reason, it didn't happen. Okay, maybe you intended to get out of debt, or to spend more quality time with your family, to volunteer in the community, to grow in your faith, to go to therapy, maybe to go back to school, or to set aside time for personal growth, whatever it may be. I think most of us, if not all of us, have experienced a time in our life when we had an intended place that we wanted to arrive at, and then for whatever reason, that thing didn't happen. Because see, we can make plans and we can write down our goals and dream, get big and get really excited about our future and have the intention of seeing these things happen, but it will take more than just good intentions to get you to your destination. Way more than just good intentions. See, I'm willing to bet that every single one of us at least once has had the intention of ending up in one place, but actually ended up someplace entirely different. And the reason that this happens is because often there is a disconnect between our intention and our direction. There's a disconnect that can happen between those two things. We intend for one thing to happen, but the choices that we're making end up taking us in a different direction. Okay, so maybe you say that you want to get out of debt, that's your intention, but you keep making the choice to go out to eat all the time and to keep shopping at Target. And so that just doesn't happen. You want to invest in your personal growth. You want to read more. You want to listen to more podcasts, be a self-learner. So your intention is to do that, but then you continue to choose to just binge watch Netflix in all of your spare time. And so it doesn't happen. You want to be emotionally healthy and whole, but you keep putting off going to counseling or therapy. You want for your family to spend more quality time together, but you continue to allow yourself to be consumed with work. See, we can want a lot of things, and we can have a lot of goals and dreams and ways in which we want to better ourselves, but we have to do more than just want those things. We have to learn to line up our actions with our intentions. See, last week we learned that direction determines our destination, and today I want to take it one step further by saying direction, not intention, determines our destination. Because we can say we want something all day long, but if we aren't making choices to set ourselves on the path headed in that direction, then we will never achieve those things. And this is applicable in so many areas of our life. We could talk about how this applies to our careers, to our relationships, our families, our dreams, our goals, and it would be helpful for all of those things. And I would encourage you today to add, when you leave here today, take what you've heard today and use it to apply it to all of those different areas. But today, there is one area in particular when it comes to this idea of direction, not intention, determining our destination. There's one particular thing that I want to focus on, and because we're in church, today, I want to focus on how this pertains to us following Jesus. How does this pertain to us following Jesus? See, last week, Dan ended his message by talking about Jesus' invitation for us to follow him. And we see in Scripture that this was an invitation that Jesus gave to us, that it wasn't an invitation to say a prayer. It wasn't an invitation to ascribe to a certain belief system. It was simply an invitation to follow. And in order to follow someone, you have to learn to walk the path that they walked. In order to follow Jesus, if our desired destination is to follow Jesus, then we have to make sure that we are headed in the right direction. We have to make sure we're not just full of good intentions about following Jesus, but that the path we are on is actually leading us down the direction of following Jesus. Because walking this path is just like any other path. Your direction will determine your destination. And we can have really good intentions when it comes to following Jesus. I mean, have you ever known someone who calls themselves a Christian, who claims to be a follower of Jesus, but when you look at their life, it makes you question whether or not they're actually following Jesus? There's a lot of people in this world that call themselves Christians, but the thing is, calling yourself a Christian and actually following Jesus can be two very different things. And this is why our goal here isn't to get you to say a prayer or to convert to a belief system, because it's easy to say a prayer. And it's easy sometimes even to just say you believe certain things and to still not actually be following Jesus. See, we want to all learn collectively how to become more like Jesus. That's our mission, is to help, for all of us to help one another, to help people to become more like Jesus. And to do that, we will have to not just have good intentions about following him. We can't just sing songs about him. We can't just talk about him. We have to actually decide to line up our actions with our intentions in order to follow him. Following Jesus will require us to move beyond intention into action. It requires that of us. And now here, I want to be really clear on something, because sometimes when we start talking about like how we have to do certain actions in order to follow Jesus, sometimes people can misconstrue that. And I'm not talking here about earning God's love, okay? Because God loves you no matter what. That is not up for debate here. Okay, we are not calling that into question. You are valued and cherished and loved by God no matter what. Here's the thing, even if you never decide to follow Jesus for the rest of your life, that does not change the fact that you are an image bearer with inherent value who is deeply loved and cherished by God. Okay, so we're not arguing that here today. These are two different things. What I'm saying is that actually following Jesus requires action on our part. We have to make the decisions that we make, and the way that we respond to people and the way that we live our lives has to be in such a way that it lines up with the way that Jesus lived, the way that Jesus made decisions, the way that Jesus responded to people in his life. So what does this look like for us? What does it look like to move beyond intention into action when following Jesus? And I think this is an important question no matter where you are in your faith journey. Because sometimes it's easy for us to sit there and go, I've been a Christian for 30 years, and we suddenly think that we have nothing left to learn. But the fact is, we are always growing and changing. And whether we started following Jesus 10 decades ago, or 10 months ago, or 10 minutes ago, we all still have so much to learn when it comes to following him. And we will never come to a place where we've arrived, because following Jesus, it's not a one-time intention, it's a lifetime of decisions with an S. It's like daily, continual decisions in our life, in our actions, in our responses, in our judgments, and all of the things that we do. It's a lifetime of decisions. So if this is the case, if making sure that we are on the right path, that we are headed in the direction to the desired destination of following Jesus, then how do we know if we're headed down the right path? Because if you're like me, there's probably been times in your life when you've been like, I don't know what to do in this situation, where it can be overwhelming. And sometimes it can feel like there's so much that we don't know that it's hard to know for sure what that really looks like. And there's something that Jesus talked about, that other writers of the scriptures talked about, this metaphor that was used, that when I was reading it last week, it just really resonated with me. And I was like, oh, this is so helpful. And this has been so helpful in my life lately to determine if I am on the right path, if I'm headed in the right direction of following Jesus. And it's something that Jesus actually mentions multiple times, and that something is fruit. It's fruit. See, Jesus was a first century rabbi, and he taught often in parables and metaphor. And one of these metaphors that he used several different times was this idea of trees and vines that bear fruit. And that being symbolic of the kinds of things that we produce out of our lives. And several times in Jesus' teaching, he talks about how trees are known by their fruit. So if you look at a tree and it has apples growing on it, then you know it's an apple tree, right? And if you look at a tree and there's oranges growing on it, then you know it's an orange tree. You don't see apples hanging on a tree and then wonder what kind of tree it is, because a tree is known by its fruit. It's known by the fruit that it produces. In the same way, you will be able to tell a lot about a person by the kind of fruit their life produces. We see Paul talking about this in Galatians, where he's talking about what this means in the context of our life. What kind of fruit should our life produce? And he's giving instructions to the church on how to live as if they belong to Christ. And in Galatians 5:22 and 23, he says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control." So these are the kinds of fruits that will come out of our life when we are committed to following Jesus. These are the kinds of fruits that we saw in Jesus' life and the way that he lived. When we look at Jesus, we see that he lived a life he just embodied love. We see that Jesus led people toward peace. Jesus was kind. Jesus was always working for the good of all. See, these are the kinds of fruits that we see. The fruit of Jesus' life was clear. And so the question then we need to ask ourselves when it comes to determining whether or not we're going the right direction, if our desired destination is to follow Jesus, then the question we need to ask is, what kind of fruit is my life producing? What kind of fruit is our lives producing? If our desired destination is to follow Jesus, then the path we take needs to lead us towards our lives bearing the same kind of fruit that Jesus did. And if we're going to call ourselves Christians, for those of us here that are going to call ourselves Christians and we are going to say that we're going to follow Jesus, then we have to be willing to get honest with ourselves about this. And we have to realize that it takes work, right? Like following Jesus is not easy. It takes work and it takes decision after decision after decision. And following Jesus is more than just giving ourselves a label. It's about how we exist in the world. It's more than good intentions, because remember, direction, not intention, will determine our destination. And I want to be clear here too that this isn't about perfection. It's not a call to being perfect. It's not a call to getting it right all the time, because here's the thing, we're gonna get it wrong sometimes. And there will be times when in our pursuit of following Jesus, we bear fruit that we wish we didn't. But the most important thing is that we know the direction we need to go and that we move beyond intention into action. So for instance, do you try to move toward love when you're tempted to hate? Do you make an effort to make peace when you're tempted to engage in a fight? Do you work toward generosity when really what you want is to only care about yourself? Do you gather up the courage to speak truth to power when it would better serve you just to keep quiet? Do you continue to choose to be faithful in your commitments when it would be easier to quit? See, it's decision after decision after decision to make sure we are headed in the right direction. That is how we stay on the path of following Jesus. And like I said, we're not going to get it right all the time. And following Jesus is not easy. The way of Jesus is not easy. If people told you that if you make the decision to follow Jesus, all of a sudden your life is going to be rainbows and roses and everything is going to be great, they were lying to you, because that's not true. Following Jesus has been one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. One of the best things, yes, but one of the hardest. But Jesus gives us a really great word of encouragement that really helps me when I think about, okay, how can I do this when it's hard and when I'm unsure about making these hard decisions? How can I continue to make sure I'm headed in the right direction? And we find in John 15, verses 4 and 5, where Jesus says this: "Abide in me as I abide in you, just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing." And then down further in verse 16, he says, "You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last." The key to bearing the kind of fruit that Jesus did in his life is abiding in him. Abiding in him. To abide is to dwell in, to live in, to stay connected to. The way that we're going to know the right direction to go, the way that we're going to know if we're headed down the right path, if our desired destination is to follow Jesus, we know we're headed in the right direction when we're abiding in him. And there's so many different ways that we can stay connected to Jesus, and the way that you connect with God might look really different from how I do. But a couple of things that have really helped me to abide in Jesus and to follow the way of Jesus is, one is just reading about the life of Jesus in the Gospels. I come back to that time and time and time again. I read about his life. I read about the way he loved, the way he lived, the way he served, the way he fought against injustice, the way that he took care of people, the way that he showed grace. And when I read those things about the life of Jesus, I'm reminded, okay, that's what it looks like to follow Jesus. And then another way that I make sure I'm staying connected to Jesus and following that path is I ask myself this question. I ask myself, how would love respond? When I'm in certain situations and man, if I'm in a situation where someone has hurt me and what I want to do is hurt them back, right? Isn't that what we want to do? If someone hurts us, we want them to hurt too. When that happens, I have to stop and ask myself, how would love respond? Would love hurt them back? Or maybe if I'm, come across someone who thinks really differently than I do and it's driving me crazy and I'm tempted to just write them off because we think so different, I need to stop and ask myself, how would love respond? Would love write them off, or would love listen and seek to understand? These are just a couple of things that I personally do to help me to abide in Jesus, to stay connected to that vine. And so whatever that looks like for you, it looks different for all of us, and that's okay. That's actually really beautiful. But abiding in Jesus and allowing Jesus to abide in us will help us to see these fruits of the Spirit. The same fruits that marked his life will mark ours. And this is how we move beyond just good intentions. This is how we say, okay, my desired destination is to follow Jesus. So in order to head in the right direction, I got to know what kind of fruit Jesus' life bore so that my life can bear the same thing. And in my experience, through it all, through the good, the bad, the beautiful, the ugly, and everything in between, for me, following Jesus has been the best way to live. And I really do believe that it is the best way to live. When we all love like Jesus loved and serve like Jesus served and treat people the way Jesus did, I really believe we will find that even though it's not easy, that it is the best way to live. And there are so many things I don't know, and I get it wrong more than I get it right. It pushes me out of places where I feel comfortable, and it's been costly. And can I be real honest with you? There's mornings where I wake up and I go, I don't even know if I believe any of this. Have you ever had moments like that where you're like, the doubt just comes in and you're like, I just don't even know about this. But despite all of that, in the middle of all of it, I have found that following Jesus has been the best way to live. And I want to encourage you today to say that if you are finding that following Jesus is hard, if you're finding that moving, you hear me today talk about this and you're like, oh, but it's so much easier to just sit down and to have really good intentions about doing things, but when I actually have to put action to it, it's really hard. If that's where you're at today, I'm simply here to just say to you, me too, and you're not alone. You're not alone. It's hard. And it's hard to do this in other areas of our life too. When it comes to like our families or our parenting or our careers or the dreams we have or the goals that we've set for ourselves, it's hard to move past intention. It's hard to actually put actions with our intention to actually make sure that we are going toward our desired destination. It is not easy. And it's hard to make those tough choices and those daily decisions over and over again. But can you all just imagine with me for a minute what all of our lives would look like if we actually committed to this way of living? If we all committed to moving beyond intention into action in our life in every area, financially, relationally, emotionally, spiritually. in the way of following Jesus in every way? What if we all committed to that? We're saying, we are not just going to be people that talk about it. We're not just going to be people that wish things would change. We're not just going to be people that have a lot of good intentions. We're going to be people that actually get out there and do it. We get out there and create the life we want for ourselves. We get out there and we fight injustice. We get out there and we take care of our family. We get out there and we make the hard choices to see our life become what we want it to become. So, Icon, what if every one of us lived this way? What would our families look like? What would our community look like? And most importantly, in this way of following Jesus, what would it look like if we choose to actually move beyond intention into action and really follow him? And my prayer for us today is that we would especially be a church who isn't just committed to the idea of Jesus, but that we may actually be committed to following the way of Jesus. Amen.